Welcome to the Accepted Authority podcast, where we help you solve a common growth challenge. And as always, with me is Greg Rowith. G'day, Greg.
G'day, Andy. I'm really excited about what we're talking about today.
Absolutely. I'm Andy Marmont as well. Now, today we are going to be speaking about a topic that keeps coming up in a lot of conversations that we're having at the moment. And that's about how to sell more effectively to non-referral based leads, because what we're seeing is it's so typically when you're getting referrals, the conversion rate is high. That's because they're already warmed up, and so to me it's a slightly different level of opportunity versus a completely cold one when you're starting to do some marketing, and there's going to be a drop there. And what we've identified is that there's an area to focus on when we want to improve both that conversion rate and also how we approach those sorts of sales conversations. So, Greg, we'll have a bit of a chat about that, and I think it's going to be really worthwhile to just go a bit deeper with the idea of what do these buyers want in this landscape, and how do they approach sales conversations, because it's very different to even sort of 3 or 4 years ago. So maybe we'll start with a bit of context, Greg. Yeah, tell us about why do you think this is important? You know, how to sell without being salesy, if you like.
Yeah, no, so I think very common for consultants to be in the service professions, I guess, across the board. You know, we're here to serve, and we have solutions that we sell. So when we get an opportunity and identify that our client has a problem, it's a pretty natural instinct for us to go into a sales mode. Like, I can solve that problem for you. Here's how we do that. But, you know, that may be fine when you're talking to a referred lead, because they're pretty much already at that point. They've got a reasonable amount of knowledge generally about who you are and what you do and what problems that you solve, because they've come in with that trust that's been referred by the person that sent them. So we can go into that, I can solve that problem, here's how we do it. And they're fairly receptive, and we typically get a very high conversion rate on that. But when you operate in that mode to a non-referred lead, they lack all of that foundational trust, the knowledge of who we are and what we do and what problem we solve. So when we go into that sales mode of explaining, what we do and how we can solve their problem, without the trust there, it actually creates resistance, and they feel pressured, because they start to feel like we're selling them, and
yes.
Then they back off and create that sales resistance that's often there. Anytime there's any pressure around that sales process, doesn't matter what it is, but as consultants, we're going to cop the brunt of that as well, if that's the approach we take.
So what's the impact of going in with that mindset about not actually going straight into solution mode, Greg, without having if it is completely cold? We pick up a lead through our website, for example. So what mindset or what approach should we be adopting?
Well, I think when we do adopt that sales approach, it's a very natural approach. It's a natural way that we operate. So the problem with that is that the creating that resistance means that we need to start convincing the person that they need our services. We need to justify what we do, justify why our process works. We need to be selling in that justification, logical sense of here's how we're doing it. This is why this service works best for the problem you have. So we're doing all the talking, we're doing all of the input, and really it's a very difficult job, particularly for people where sales is not their full-time role. Unless you're really good at selling, and it's a full-time role. Sometimes you can have the gift of the gab, as they say, and that gets through. But for most of us consultants who we're not born salespeople, we're going to come unstuck more times than not, because we're just trying to convince, and we're building up resistance and creating objections that, you know, the clients are going to go away and say, oh, yeah, well, let me think about that, or, you know, send me a proposal. You know, all of those put-offs that are really just, yeah, the end of a process more often than not. So it's really counterintuitive to think, well, we'll sell without trying to sell. You know, and we actually create more trust and a more receptive client when we don't try to sell them. But when we show interest in them, when we focus more on their problem and their situation than on what we're trying to sell. So trying to sell without selling means that when a client mentions the problem they're having, instead of going into the I can solve that problem mode, it's backing off and asking more questions around that. So tell me more about that. You know, what's the impact of that situation? And really throwing it back to them to explain more about it. And when that happens, they start to feel like you're interested in them. You're more concerned about them solving the problem than you selling your services. And it just sets up a better foundation for that conversation.
Yes, and it's a great way of explaining it, Greg. I think the transformation for me was when I didn't really have a sales process. Someone would call me and I would just sort of fumble my way through a conversation, and there was no real strategy. But I can tell you that since I adopted a similar approach to what you're saying there, where it's really about, 90% them, 10% me. Yeah. So it's really understanding about their business. It's understanding what they think the problem that they solve is. It's understanding about their vision and what they want to achieve, and also the roadblocks. Like, to me, that's a real big part of it. Get them to self-diagnose what's missing or broken that's stopping you from achieving that goal, and why is that? What's particularly challenging about that? And if you're not able to do that in a time frame, then what impact would that have? I feel like sort of going a bit deeper with that, and then obviously understanding, well, there's the vision over here, but where are you now? So it's really about, as an example, for a lot of project type work or pieces of work, it's getting to articulate the vision, where they want to get to, their aspiration, but also, well, where are we now? And then there's that gap that you really want to sort of talk about and understand. And it's not for us to point that out. It's really about getting that self-realization, which is, I think, what you're talking about there, Greg.
That's right. Well, really, to sell without selling, we have to create, well, we don't have to create it, but a desire has to be created in the client's mind and in their heart, their emotions, to change. They have to have that motivation to change from where they are to have the possibility of achieving the goals they want.
Yes.
So when they're the ones that are spelling out to us what their challenges are, what their goals are, what's the gap between, and what are the roadblocks that are preventing them from getting there, they're actually building up that problem in their own mind and expressing to us the fact that they don't have the solution, but they want a solution. So they're the ones doing the selling. We don't have to sell to them in that. All we have to do is draw out that desire and get them to express that desire, and ultimately come to the point where they ask, can you help me? And it's at that point that then you say, well, based on what you've said, I think I can. And would you like me to explain how we can achieve that? And, so you get permission from them to enter that sales dialogue rather than trying to convince them. So it's really...
Yes, I think that's what you said there.
Helps.
Yes, no, I totally agree, Greg. I think what we're saying there is, by framing it up front, the conversation as well, that to me, that's also something that's really helped me. So people know that, it's going to be 10 or 15 minutes of your time, whatever time frame you want to put it on. We'll go through and I just want to know more about your business and see if or how I can help.
Yeah.
And if I can't, I'll let you know. And if I can, we'll book a longer call. Doing something like that just takes the pressure off you, but also takes the pressure off them to think, oh, I'm going to be pitched to here. And it's no one likes to be pitched to, but they're there because there's obviously some sort of a compelling event, and it's usually around the fact they do have a problem. So, and to share a quick story around that, I had a cold lead. So someone found me online and they set up a meeting, and the first meeting was with the associate. It wasn't with the business owner, but the second meeting was. And we went through our process, and at nearing the end, I always like to switch roles and say, so where do you want to take it from here? And they, the response was, oh, well, can you tell me about why we should use you, and almost do the sales pitch? And I sort of thought, are people so wired the fact that they're being sold to all the time? It's almost like that they're expecting it. So almost to have that traction and going with that lens, which we've talked about before in this podcast, is if you can differentiate yourself by simply being there to be a problem solver, whether it's you or whether it's someone else, it is irrelevant, because they will remember this. They will remember the experience sometimes more than the actual outcome. So this client that was not a client, but he went through a process with me. I sort of said, look, it's not going to be the right fit, and we both sort of came to that conclusion. I offered an alternative, someone who I know that could, within a space that they were looking at in the future. And so they feel like I've helped them professionally, which is what we do in consulting and what we do in sales, right? We help people professionally to solve a problem. So by kind of removing yourself emotionally, removing yourself from the outcome and actually saying, well, I've got someone live in front of me who's wanting to solve a problem. I offer these sorts of services. I want to go through a process to understand if you are the right sort of fit. And if not, I can refer you to Bob over here. So it's a powerful thing, isn't it? That mindset and that approach, Greg.
No, absolutely. And knowing that we are here to serve in the best way possible and not being attached to the sale. We don't have to win the sale to be of value. And but I think another aspect that occurred to me as you were talking is, I've had the conversation a couple of times this week where clients have talked to me about the sales process, and where they say, well, what happens when a potential client has initiated the call and they control the conversation by saying, here's my problem, how can you fix it? The pressure is on, in that situation. And my advice is not to play the game, not to be the servant. In other words, they address you as a servant, as a service provider. They're like, here's my problem, how can you serve me? Don't play that game. Adopt the role of the authority straight away and say, well, before I can tell you, how I can solve that problem, I need to know a bit more about you. I need to have more information. So do you mind if I ask you some questions so that we actually see if you have a problem that I can solve? And then if it's appropriate, we'll talk about how I can solve that problem for you. So
fantastic.
Taking control of the conversation and bring it back into your process rather than the buyer's buying process. Either take control of that process yourself, or you're under their control. There's only one place to be if you want to make sales.
And it's not a good feeling, going through that. I've had experience like that where they, in fact, I got a note the other day, going through and doing my activity, and someone replied back and they said, look, I've got a brief, I'll send it to you and see if you can solve. And it's exactly what you're just saying there. And so I replied to say, hey, great, look, appreciate that. But, I think it'd be really useful if we jump on just a quick call to understand how and learn more. And you definitely don't want to be in that situation where maybe the client's used to just, delegating or having that situation. But yeah, you really want to protect your, as you say, your status. You're coming in, that you're highly valued in what you do. You get to choose who you work with. That's the other thing. You're not having to say yes to everyone. You get to constantly choose the sort of people that you want to work with, what the mindset as well. Like for me, it's a really big thing around mindset. Are they abundant in thinking? Are they sort of in scarcity? Are they just looking at cost? Are they someone who we can have who are sort of coachable, if you like, and have a long-term relationship? Or do they just want someone to sharpen their pencil, as I've heard it a few times being put, who's the, what kind of price can you do it for me? It's like, well, no, actually. So maybe to wrap this conversation up, Greg, so what we're saying there is you've just got to think about how you approach these conversations, because that's going to make the difference, isn't it, between getting good sales, but also good customers that actually, there's a mutual fit there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think you covered it pretty early in the conversation when you said you used to not have a sales process. Now you do. A lot of consultants don't really have a sales process. They just go in and wing it and hope that, by convincing and saying enough words, the client's going to say yes. But, it really is important to have your sales process, know what you're trying to achieve, have several points in that process where you're establishing benchmarks or, putting a stake in the ground that you've achieved that. Now, what's the next step? And really knowing what your goals are in each of those phases. And don't move on until you've reached that goal. And in fact, if you can't reach that goal, it could be appropriate to end the call, because you're never going to make a sale. And having no attachment to the outcome in terms of sale. And I think when it comes to that situation where the client's saying, here's my problem, give me a proposal or tell me how you're going to solve that, it's right, well, actually, this is a two-way street. I'm not just here about the sale. That's not my main concern. Yeah, if it's appropriate, then I'm happy to sell to you. But first of all, we need to know, is it a problem that I am interested in solving? Are you a person I'm interested in working with? And then we have the basis of a relationship that we can move forward on.
Well, you've said it so beautifully, Greg. So that's great advice, and I know that I got a lot out of what you've just said there around how to frame conversations that are sort of going the different ways. So thank you for sharing that. So we might wrap it up there, Greg. But as always, where can we find you online if we want to know more?
Yeah, we'll definitely look for me on LinkedIn. Just do a search for Greg Roworth, and my website is businessflightpath.com.
Fantastic. You can find me at Andy Marmont on LinkedIn, and the company website is concurve.com.au. This has been The Accepted Authority. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.